Arrested development, it's a real impressive phenomenon. Let's start with some facts. So, studies suggest that up to 60% of adults have unresolved developmental trauma that directly impacts their emotional regulation, relationships, and daily functioning. According to data from the UK's Office for National Statistics, 1 in 6 adults experience symptoms of a common mental health disorder like anxiety or depression in any given week. A 2023 YouGov survey found that nearly 1 in 3 UK adults say they often feel emotionally unequipped to handle adult life, and that number rises sharply among those who experience childhood adversity. Excuse me. The number of people entering therapy for issues related to childhood trauma has increased by over 40% in the last decade. More strikingly, a report from the Adverse Childhood Experiences, so that's ACE, study shows that nearly half of all adults in the UK have experienced at least one form of serious childhood adversity. And we know from decades of research that early trauma often halts emotional and psychological growth. So, what happens when millions of people on the outside functioning as adults are still carrying the unprocessed wounds of their younger selves? That's what we're going to explore today, because this isn't just a personal issue, it's cultural, it's economic, it's relational. We are, as a society, facing a silent crisis, one that isn't always visible but is absolutely shaping how we live, work, love, and lead. It's the crisis of arrested development. Oh, welcome back to the YouTube channel. This video is about unpacking that, what it is, where it comes from, and how it shows up in our lives and systems, and most importantly, what we can do about it. Because emotional maturity isn't a given, it's a journey, and for many that journey was interrupted. Let's talk about what it means to be emotionally stuck and how we begin to move again. We're going to start with what is arrested development and why does it matter. So arrested development, you've probably heard that phrase before, maybe on a psychological podcast, in a film script, or even scrolling through self-help pages online. But what does it actually mean, and why does it matter so much today in a world that seems to reward permanent adolescence and punish emotional maturity? In this video, we're going in really deep into many layers of what arrested development actually is, where it comes from, and why we need to talk about it far more than we currently do. Because this isn't just about individuals, it's about families, relationships, institutions, entire cultures stuck in loops they don't actually know how to break. So, at its core, arrested development is a term that describes a situation where a person's psychological or emotional growth has been halted, or in some cases, severely stunted. Think of it like this: we all grow up physically, unless there's a medical condition involved, but psychologically, that's a much messier process. Emotional maturity isn't guaranteed. And when development is arrested, frozen at a certain point due to trauma, neglect, or even environmental conditions, the consequences can last. They can last a lifetime. Now, we'll move on to the psychological roots of being stuck. Let's begin with the psychological dimension. Imagine someone who on the surface seems like a grown adult. They may have a job, maybe even a family, but under the stress they revert to childhood patterns, shutting down, throwing tantrums, avoiding responsibilities, or seeking out unhealthy attachments. This isn't just immaturity or bad habits, it's often rooted in something much deeper. Psychological arrested development often stems from unresolved childhood trauma. When a child goes through neglect, abuse, or emotional abandonment, they may learn to survive by freezing part of themselves. That part stays stuck, and even decades later, when they're in a grown up body navigating adult life, that frozen part is still operating, quietly dictating their relationship responses and self image. This shows up in many ways. It might look like someone who can't handle conflict and resorts to passive aggressive or emotional manipulation. It might be someone who depends entirely on others for their self-esteem, approval, or basic emotional regulation. Or it could be someone who fears responsibility so deeply that they sabotage jobs, relationships, or anything that asks them to show up consistently. These patterns are not random, they are echoes of a developmental process that was paused. The child never learned to trust or regulate their emotions or believe in their own worth. So the adult is left with coping mechanisms that are fundamentally childlike. But arrested development isn't always the result of severe trauma. Sometimes it's about emotional overprotection. A child who was never allowed to fail, who was rescued from every hardship, who had every emotion managed for them, may never learn how to handle discomfort, make decisions, or self soothe. The result, a grown adult who panics at the slightest stress, expects others to manage their emotional states, or becomes paralyzed when things don't go their way. It's still arrested development, just with different packaging. Now, neurodevelopmental perspectives, which is a different kind of timeline. So, there's also a neurological and developmental angle to this conversation. Conditions like autism or intellectual disabilities can sometimes be associated with delays or differences in emotional and social development. That doesn't mean those individuals are immature, far from it, but it does mean that their developmental timelines may look different and their growth may require different kinds of support. It's crucial to distinguish between arrested development caused by trauma or neglect and neurodivergent developmental differences. One is a kind of emotional injury or stalling that often cries out for repair. The other is a natural variation in the way people develop. Now, both require understanding, but they're not the same thing. Now, unfortunately, society often fails both groups. People with trauma histories are labelled as difficult or dramatic, while neurodivergent individuals are seen as immature or weird. In both cases, instead of receiving empathy, they get judgment. Instead of support, they get isolation. And that lack of compassionate understanding only deepens the freeze, so to speak. Now, the cultural and economic landscape of feelings is different. So now let's zoom out slightly because arrested development isn't just a personal issue; it's also social, cultural, economic. We live in a world that, in many ways, encourages permanent adolescence. In many Western societies, young people are taking longer to reach traditional milestones, moving out, getting married, settling into careers, and it's not always by choice. Housing is unaffordable, wages are stagnant, the job market is unstable, Mental health issues are on the rise. Student loan debt looms over entire generations. The result? A generation that feels stuck, not because they're lazy, but because the system is broken. Yeah, arrested development can be a collective condition. In this sense, you can think of arrested development as a cultural freeze, a generation burdened with anxiety, debt, and uncertainty, who grew up with high expectations and limited support. Add to that the effects of digital technology, constant distractions, social media comparisons, and instant gratification, and you've got the perfect storm. A culture where deep emotional growth is often replaced by performance, surface level validation, and numbing behaviors. Now, look, let's be honest. We don't reward emotional maturity in our society. We reward consumption, productivity, and appearance. We value youth, speed, and spectacle over reflection, depth, and stability. So, is it any surprise that so many people are stuck in a kind of extended adolescence? That so many men, for example, struggle to transition from boyhood to manhood, not biologically, but emotionally. That so many women feel trapped in caregiving roles, managing emotionally stunted partners while neglecting their own needs. It's something to think about. Let's move on to how it plays out in a relationship and power. Um, this brings us to relationships because arrested development wreaks havoc here. When one or both partners are emotionally undeveloped, you get dynamics rooted in codependency, avoidance, or dysfunction. One person might play the parent, the other the child, or both might be children, fighting, blaming, sulking, without the tools to resolve conflict, build intimacy, or take accountability. Real partnership requires emotional maturity, and arrested development undermines that at every level. It creates communication breakdowns, intimacy barriers, and a lack of safety and growth. People stop being able to evolve together. They get stuck in patterns, fighting the same fights, blaming the same wounds, never healing. And it doesn't stop with romantic relationships. It spills into parenting, work, community. An emotionally arrested parent may be unable to provide the stability, boundaries, and atonement their children need. An emotionally arrested leader may struggle with power, decision making, or ethical behavior. The consequences ripple outward, affecting families, organizations, even politics. We're talking about a kind of arrested maturity at scale, where entire systems are run by people who haven't done their emotional work, where leaders can take feedback, where institutions avoid accountability, where grown adults behave like wounded children, deflecting, attacking, denying, collapsing. Now, what are the pathways forward? What is the healing and the growth? Okay, so what do we do about it? First, we need to normalize the conversation. Too many people carry shame about their feelings, like they should have it all together by now, wondering why they keep repeating the same patterns, thinking they're uniquely broken. They're not. Arrested development is widespread. It's just hidden beneath layers of performance, business, and denial. Second, we need better systems of support. That means trauma informed therapy that doesn't just pathologize people, but helps them reconnect with the parts of themselves that got left behind. It means schools and workplaces that value emotional intelligence as much as technical skills. It means parenting, education, community healing, and yes, policy reform that addresses the economic and social barriers keeping people stuck. And finally, we need to reclaim the value of growing up, not in the traditional rigid sense of becoming a respectable adult who follows all the rules, but in a deeper sense of becoming someone who knows themselves, takes responsibility for their choices, and can hold space for others. Someone who can feel their feelings without being ruled by them, who can say sorry, who can sit with discomfort. That kind of maturity is radical, and we need more of it. So, the next time you see someone acting out, shutting down, or spiraling, pause before you judge. Ask what what part of them is stuck. What did they never learn? What pain are they carrying that froze them in time? And then ask the same questions of yourself. Because we've all got places where our development was interrupted, places we've avoided or abandoned. The invitation is not to be perfect, but to get curious, to soften, to grow. Now, for you that have been watching this for long enough or been watching the YouTube channel, we know we always get to the final thoughts. Arrested development isn't a moral failure. It's not laziness, and it's not just a trendy label. It's a window into the unseen emotional injuries that shape how we move through the world. Some of us were never taught how to regulate our feelings. Some of us were never given the safety to explore who we are. Others had to grow up too fast, learning to survive instead of learning to feel. But all of us, at some point, have had parts of our development interrupted, postponed, or frozen in time. What matters now is what we do with the truth. This isn't about blaming our parents or the system or the past. It's about finally telling the truth about where we've been stuck, where we've been hiding, and what we need to unlearn in order to grow. Real maturity isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to ask better questions. Who am I when I'm not performing? What am I avoiding? What old wound is driving my current behavior? These are questions that unfreeze us. And yes, this kind of growth is messy, slow, and uncomfortable. But it's also the only thing that heals, that makes intimacy possible, that transforms leadership, parenting, and community, that turns wounded children in adult bodies into grounded, self-aware people who can show up for themselves and for others. If any part of this video resonated with you, if you saw yourself in the examples, if you recognize patterns you've been repeating, if something inside you whispered, that's me, then let this be your invitation. You're not broken. You're just unfinished. And the story doesn't end there. You can grow. You can heal. You can become the person you never got to be. And the world desperately needs more people who've made that journey. Thank you for watching. If this helped you, please share it. And don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to the channel. Someone else out there is still frozen, and your voice might be their first thought. Until next time, please take care.